Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Yoon Cho from Sogang University. Due to some unavoidable schedule, Dr. Sagong asked me to chair today's meeting. As you know, China never ceases to providing headline news to global media and making attraction from global financial and economic communities. Last week, there was an announcement that IMF has decided to include RMB in SDR basket. I think this decision will have a far-reaching impact in the future course of Chinese economic and financial reform. Perhaps no other country would be as strongly affected as Korea by what's happening in China and the Chinese economy. And people here in Korea, as well as in the rest of the world, have a keen interest to learn what's really happening in Chinese economy and what will be the future course of its economic reform. Today we have a distinguished speaker who will provide some insights on this. Dr. Huang is currently the managing director of China International Capital Corporation. He's a very renowned economist in China. And last week, it's on Monday. Actually, Premier Li Keqiang asked the six economists, invited six economists to give him advice about future economic reform, including Joe Stiglitz and Bert Hoffman, who is the currently director of the Beijing office of the World Bank. And he was one of them, and we very much look forward to hearing his insight on Chinese economy and China's future economic reform agenda. If I may briefly introduce his CV, Dr. Huang Haizhou has bachelor and master degree in engineering from China, and PhD in business administration from Indiana University. And over the last 20 years, he has experience of conducting research at market, policy, and academic institutions. He taught at the Chinese University of Hong Kong, London School of Economics, and Tsinghua University. And he was a senior economist at the International Monetary Fund. And also, he was head of Great China Research at Barclays Capital. And since 2007, he has been the managing director of China International Capital Corporation, serving as the chief strategist and the co-head of research, as well as sales and trading and other responsibility. Ladies and gentlemen, may I ask you to join me in extending warm welcome to Dr. Huang to the podium.
Good morning. First of all, I'm very grateful to Institute for Global Economics for inviting me to give this presentation, and I really appreciate Professor Cho's warm introduction. So I think that I'm currently a market economist. Before that, I worked in an academic institution at the IMF policy. So I will use the about 40 minutes to report to you some of our thinkings on China economy. China, of course, now is also an integral part of the world. So I certainly would also welcome opportunities to exchange views with you about the global economy and so on and so forth. I travel a lot. I travel to Europe a lot and to US a lot. So I think that there's a lot that we can discuss. So my title is Perspective on China's Economy and Economic Reform. And I would basically talk about the two views. One, very short-term view. China's economy is finding the so-called new normal, and I will try to describe what is the new normal. And the new normal also has many challenges for China's economy. What kind of challenge would that be? And then basically, I would try to provide a longer-term view. China is drafting the next 5-year plan, the 13th 5-year plan, and so last Monday, the Prime Minister Li invited 6 economists. I'm one of them, and Joe Stiglitz and Bob Hoffman and others to basically discuss what China's risk, what kind of risk China is facing, not for the next year, for the next 5 years. And what kind of policy China should choose, and so on and so forth. So I think that China will be facing more challenges down the road, and will provide a longer-term view. So first of all, on the short-term view, which I think that in my presentation you will find there are many tensions. There's so many challenges in the short term, so many tensions in the economy. On macro. Basically, that we think that the growth rate is continue to slowing down, but probably is about to stabilize, and that's also a view Professor Chu and I were discussing. This is the forecast of CICC. CICC is my company, China International Capital Corporation. It started with a joint venture investment bank, and now actually last month we were listed on Hong Kong Stock Exchange. And we have Chinese shareholders, international shareholders, including GIC, TPG, KK, and now we have many small shareholders who bought the stock in the Hong Kong Stock Exchange. So basically, that as you can tell, that the growth rate come down in 2013, 7.7%. Then basically that last year 7.3, and this year we expect it will be 6.9, and the next year inch down a little to 6.8, something like that. Yeah. Before 2007, 2008, China's growth rate was about 10%, and actually, before 2008, if you average China's growth rate for 30 years before that, roughly close to 10%, 9.8%, something like that. Inflation is coming down, and towards 1%. Okay, for a developing country, I think that level of inflation suggesting they probably, first of all, the CPI inflation is a bit low, and also if you look at the PPI has been in negative territory, next 4%, 5% for quite some time. And actually, for almost 4 years, okay, it's in negative territory. Growth rate also start to come down. So I think that's the macro picture. There are many problems in the economy. I mean, many tensions, I would say, many challenges. Okay, one of the problems is the financing cost in China is high. Okay, why inflation coming down? The real cost of borrowing for the economy maintained at a high level. In some sectors, for manufacturing sector, for example, the real costs went up. Okay, I will show you those costs. Okay, the in terms of monetary policy, we think that China is finding a new normal. New normal means that previously, of course, that if you think about the monetary policy, China's export sector was doing well. Okay. The exporters sell their foreign proceeds to their own commercial banks. The own commercial banks sell the foreign proceeds to central bank. Central bank then convert that into domestic currency, renminbi, and then that's complete the whole cycle. Is right. And when the economic growth is very strong, and central bank will lock up the excess liquidity through excess reserve requirement. Okay. So that completes the whole cycle of money injection. Now, of course, that with export growth come down a lot, and that kind of cycle would not work, is right. So China need to find a new way to inject liquidity into the financial system. Moreover, I think that inflation rate come down so much. Okay. Some of the borrowing costs I will show you, went up a bit too high, and that causing, a lot of problems to the economy. So central banks start to cut deposit rate and cut lending rate. But now I think that a major challenge to the economy is the transmission mechanism. That transmission mechanism is not working well, to put it mildly. In our view, the financial conditions in China is still too restrictive for growth to recover. Okay, and here I plot a real lending rate. If you think about the real lending rate in China, is pretty much is at a high level. The real lending rate for manufacturing sector, you will see would be even very high or ridiculously high. Liquidity in China is gradually improving internally. I call it internally. We also discussed the challenge from the if you look at it from the external sector. Why the economy growth rate come down? As you can tell, barely a year ago, a simple wealth management product yield in China was 7%, 8%, in some cases 10%. Okay, those wealth management products yield start to come down, and also bill discount rate also start to come down. Okay, so liquidity internally start to come down to improve. Also, if you think about the liquidity in the equity market, internally, I think that after the July market volatility also start to come down. Here, I plot something probably quite interesting in my view. This is basically margin financing. I do a simple comparison of China's margin financing with rest of the world. I actually alerted to the CSRC, which is China's Securities Regulatory Commission, when before it reached 8.7%, and basically that if you think about the margin financing, there is globally, and Korea number, we also look at the Korea number, all that. I think that this is the first time China allowed margin financing for retail investors. Retail investors can place the stock and borrow money and buy more stocks. And when the number all of a sudden reached over 6%, 7%, 8.7%, that the risk embedded in the system was enormous. And then of course the market, market strongly reacted to that. And there was huge sell-off, from July. Trading volume in China, as you can tell, this year also went up so high, then come down a lot. In April and May, and if you look at the trading volume in Shanghai Stock Exchange and Shenzhen Stock Exchange, often that China's one-day trading volume is about 40% of the world total trading volume. Okay. For brokers, for investment bank, that's a good life, but that life cannot continue because it cannot be sustainable. It went too far. Market turnover rose, but then come down. And margin financing basically, as I said, went up so much, it then came down, and now it's trying to stabilize. And also that I think that the market find some kind of flaw. If you look at Asia, which is China's domestic equity market valuation, many sectors are still above the historical average, which reflect that the domestic liquidity in domestic equity market still remain quite high. You know that if you think about a Chinese household, if you from the economics perspective, the Chinese households still do not have many vehicles to invest. The best investment vehicle for them, at least for the last 15 years or so, were buying properties. Okay, so property price went up so much. At this stage, I think that going forward, people start to be concerned about the risk in the property sector. So continue to invest in property probably won't be very wise for household sector. A lot of household sector just parks what I was saving in the banking sector. For the banking sector, I will show you that household saving account for about 80% of the total GDP. Well, the total amount of household debt is about 40%. So there is an additional 40% of saving in the system, i.e., it's not doing much. Okay. Of course, that the deposit rate is coming down. Okay. So I think that simply park the money in the deposit account wouldn't make much sense either. So you would think that a third vehicle or a third avenue for the household sector would be to invest in the equity market. I think that there was indeed a lot of demand in that area, and in my view, that the valuation in the Asia market reflect that the domestic equity market still has decent liquidity there. However, if you look at the Hong Kong market, H share, which is Chinese companies listed in Hong Kong Stock Exchange, the valuation is still below historical average. In some sectors, the valuation is so low, probably is more or less the same as the 2008 financial crisis. It's close to there. So if one would believe in the Hong Kong market's pricing power, one would probably draw a conclusion that there could be a major financial risk in the system. Okay, I say one would. Okay, we can clarify that because Hong Kong market reflect China's fundamentals and the international liquidity. If you think about the international liquidity, in particular in this year, from the beginning of this year, international liquidity is leaving emerging market. It's leaving emerging market. Okay. If you look at it, if you compare all the emerging market performance, let's say that for major developing countries, two major developing countries are in serious recession, Russia and Brazil. Okay. If you look at the other emerging market economies across the globe, say Mexico and Chile, one would think that those economies are relatively doing well. But if you think about it, those two economies in Latin America, two large economies, the currency devalued against the US dollar 20-30%. Okay, the stock index, come down another 20-30%. So from so basically they barely avoid a recession in terms of in their own currency, but from international perspective, they went through a very heavy nominal adjustment. Okay, and there are many countries like that this year. In Asia, of course, if you think about Indonesia, Malaysia, Thailand, they went through that kind of process. So in the whole world, I think that as I see it, that the liquidity is leaving emerging market, and a lot. I think that the situation would be, in my view, probably would be even worse for next year. In particular, for commodity exporting countries, or countries that borrow internationally for their own for their own internal liquidity. So the first set of countries, I think that would include many Middle Eastern countries and Saudi Arabia, country like that. Saudi Arabia this year is liquidating its sovereign wealth fund globally, try to bring liquidity back. If you look at the price of oil, I think that certainly that there are many problems in the future. The second set of country, in my view, would probably include Malaysia, or to some extent Thailand. They again continue to rely on international liquidity for their domestic financing. And Korea, I think Korea learned from the Asian financial crisis. But some of the countries that were hit by Asian financial crisis have not learned that lesson. So I think that the Hong Kong market reflect the aggregate picture of the emerging market liquidity. I think that there's a serious issue there. Housing prices start to come down, and that's why I say that continue to invest in housing from the household sector probably would not be very wise. I.e., I mean, they probably want to diversify the investment and not just focus too much on that. And FAI investment, which is fixed asset investment, also start to come down. Before 2004, this is China's fixed asset investment growth rate year on year was over 50%. Okay. In 2009 to 2010, that's right after the 2008 global financial crisis, China was one of the first countries to launch the stimulus package. So again, the fixed asset investment growth rate went up to over 30%. Now basically it's 10%, slightly above 10%. Okay, China's growth rate come down. One of the reasons is the investment come down a lot. Okay. Here, this is what I implied. Basically, that if you think about the borrowing cost for the consumer, probably is reasonable. I'm using consumers' borrowing rate, then I mean, that's and then I subtract the CPI. Okay, for manufacturer, I use manufacturer's borrowing rate. Then I subtract PPI. PPI is hugely negative, so you can tell that the manufacturer sector, the real borrowing cost is 10%. I think that's very, very high for them. So the whole sector is now, of course, is taking up billion. And then, of course, the real interest rate for home buyers, home price, in that index went up. This has become very volatile. Many years, I think you can tell it's negative, because if the price goes up 20%, your borrowing cost is 10%, then the real cost is minus 10%. So that's why I say that if you think about the transmission mechanism in China, the transmission mechanism in China is not working properly. And in particular, the real borrowing cost for manufacturing sector is very high. They since the 2005 reform of renminbi, the stronger renminbi also suppressed export. After 2008, of course, the global financial crisis also is a factor. Basically, that if you think about the growth rate in the U.S. recovered, but not really fully back to 2008, 2007 level. Europe is still recovering. Europe's growth rate is wobbling around 1% if you think about GDP growth rate. But anyhow, if you take out, if you think about the real effective exchange rate of renminbi, real effective exchange rate of renminbi since 2005 went up about 50%. So I think that that's also explained that partly the slowing down of the growth rate. Okay, renminbi, I will come back to renminbi. Renminbi basically that on August 11th and 12th, renminbi devalued a little, then renminbi start to stabilize, and this week renminbi also start to move. Okay. I talk about the internal liquidity. I say that the internally liquidity probably is still okay, in particular in some sector, in consumer sector, in property market. And the borrowing cost for real sector, manufacturing sector is a little too high. I say that for external liquidity, we need to be we need to treat it separately. There is, actually, since the China's economy started to moderate, I think that we from the market we watch this capital outflow. I think that the capital outflow is an issue in China that China need to watch closely. I think that PBOC is watching this very closely. China's central bank. Okay, China is still sitting at $3.5 trillion watch So I'm not so much worried about exchange risk, okay? But I think this is a factor that China will need to watch closely. This is a PMI I mentioned, which is basically still fairly weak. In terms of short-term policy, I think the PBOC still has many tools, including cut excess reserve requirement, okay? And also they can cut the repo rate, and they can cut they can deposit rate, and they can cut lending rate. So I think that they are the tools. China has not reached to so-called zero bound yet. Okay, there is still a lot of room for the interest rate to come down. Okay, and central bank bond yield also start to drop. Okay, and that's I think that to me that's good. Yeah, and one of the issues that face the economy since 2008 is that the corporate sector's leverage ratios, went up. Before 2008, if you think about the global economy, say U.S. as a block, Europe as a block, emerging market as a block, U.S. leveraged up too much. Okay, U.S. got itself into serious trouble. It's a major financial crisis. Europe basically, leveraged up, but not that much in a way. But the Europe, of course, relied more on banking financing. So Europe's leverage up ratio was higher in general than the U.S. because U.S. relied more on equity, on direct financing. So if you compare, say, corporate borrowing, corporate leverage ratio, U.S. corporate borrowing ratio is much higher, much lower, the lowest, in major economy. If you use GDP as the denominator, U.S. total amount of corporate borrowing, those including all companies, okay, publicly listed company and small companies, medium-sized companies, U.S. is about 60%, i.e., the total amount of debt borrowed by all corporates is only about 60% of the total U.S. GDP. Europe, 120 to 140% of GDP. Many developing countries at that time, before 2008, the ratio was lower than that, 180 or maybe 80%. Basically, that after U.S. household leverage was much higher. U.S. corporate sector did not borrow that much. After 2008, U.S. seriously engaged in deleveraging from the financial sector to household sector. The corporate sector in the U.S. did not really need to deleverage. 60% is not that high. Europe is trying to do deleverage, but hasn't made much progress yet. U.S. made a huge progress in financial deleveraging. I think that the U.S., in my view, is ready to, leverage up again. Okay, but Europe is still trying to do deleveraging. If we compare that to a block of emerging markets, China, Brazil, Russia, India, all the emerging markets, economy, virtually all of them leverage up a lot after 2008. China is no exception. I'm not talking about China alone. That's China's. So I think that the world has changed. While U.S. now, can leverage up, many emerging markets will have to do deleveraging by choice or by default. Okay, I think that that's one of the problems China is facing. Okay, however, that if you do a more serious analysis, the main leverage issue faced in China's economy would be the corporate sector, in particular the SOEs. Okay, I will show you a chart. Say that the state-owned sector's leverage ratio went up a lot. The private sector is doing okay. China's household doesn't have a problem. Okay, if anything, China's household can leverage up. Okay, that's I think yeah. Here, basically that the right side, I take a deposit out, then deposit minus debt minus deposit, and divided by GDP. As you can tell, really the non-financial sector is still leverage ratio is still. Maybe it's still a little high or too high. The public sector is doing okay. The private sector basically is negative, so this is not really a problem. Corporate bond, I wouldn't talk about that. Yeah, I will come back to this chart. This chart, this has a lot of interesting I want to discuss. I want to now change to some long-term issues. Talk about reform, opening up, and then say growth in the next 5 years. Okay, I think that. The first chart I want to show you is that China's economy has a business cycle. The business cycle is more or less driven by a political cycle. Okay. When the growth rate goes up, as you know that pretty much that growth rate is supported by main reform effort or main opening up reform effort. The first cycle, of course, that China started with rural reform, 1978, and after 1989, in particular after 1992, as the market-oriented reform, which was a key driver, okay, and that boosted the economic growth. Then China quickly got itself into high inflation. 1994, CPI inflation reached 21%, and then China tried to do deleverage and also restructuring of the state-owned sector. Unfortunately, China was also hit by the Asian financial crisis. So you can tell that, this, in terms of the structuring coming down, growth slowing down, and this is probably the most serious. Okay, the third one, of course, China. 2001, China joining the WTO really helped China to further boost its growth, and this lasts until 2007, and then now I think the economy is facing new challenge. My point is the following. Okay, this is I think that China's business cycle is really you can explain really well by political cycle. Each group of new leaders want to grow the economy. So I would not be surprised if the growth rate will find a flaw and then rebound and then have another cycle. Okay, I think that we are almost there. Okay, that would be my view. The whole story of China is really the reform and opening up. Okay, the major turning point, of course, in 1978. The second turning point is 2001. This is joining the WTO. Okay. Firstly, I mean, this is from 1978 to 2000 is China's more or less domestic economy, internal reform, okay, rural reform, SA reform, so on and so forth. China was not so much integrated to the rest of the world. 2001, of course, WTO accession, and you can tell that in terms of trading volume, in terms of reserves, okay. This is basically how much China's import and export as a percentage of total world trade, and this is China's reserve. At the year 2000, China's total amount of reserve is only about 166 billion US dollars. Okay, and now it's about 3.5 trillion. So I think that the whole story in China, in my view, can be explained very well by internal reform and external opening up. China will continue to push on both internal reform and the external opening up. This is if you read the IMF World Bank study, this is according to PPP, China could be the largest economy, but China doesn't internally. China do not want to use this. Okay, in terms of a nominal exchange rate, China has about 10 trillion US dollars. The US is about 16 trillion US dollars. That's about 10 trillion US dollar economy growing at 7%. Okay, that's every year the added size is probably bigger than the average European country. That's every year the added size of GDP is bigger than the size of GDP of the whole of an average European economy. Size matters. I will come back to that. Where is China now? Okay. After 30 years of rapid growth, China is still a developing country, a relatively low-income emerging market economy. China probably is still quite behind Korea, and that's quite, this is where we use the U.S. economy, U.S. GDP per capita. We normalize everything against the U.S. GDP per capita. Okay, China is here. Okay. Korea, of course, now is if my data is right, it's somewhere around 50% of U.S. GDP per capita. UK is about 75%. Japan is 72%. Okay, where's China? 12%. Brazil, about 22%. Okay. The point is really that China has a long way to go to catch up. China is still at this catching up period. Okay, if you look at Korea, for example, when Korea basically say that when Korea was at 20% of U.S. or not 20%, let's say 12% U.S. level, what was Korea's GDP growth rate? Okay, China has not completed the industrialization process or urbanization process yet. Those are the two keywords we need to keep in mind. Okay, one country very interesting is Japan. Okay, Japan as the peak Japan's GDP per capita reached about 140. Now it's Japan is about 70% of the U.S. GDP. US is growing. I mean, Japan did not really grow since 1990s, more or less. Yeah, that's it. Another phenomenon I want to bring up is the following. I worked at Barclays Capital, so I watched very closely, for the Asian economies. If you think about the Asian economies, I noticed some very interesting comparison about the dynamics. Japan is one of them. Okay, Korea is doing well, I believe. Yeah. If you think about the last 20 years, basically that before, let's say that 1998 or 94, 95, so to now, say last 20 years, what had happened? What happened is that the four economy, if you do comparison of four economies, the four economies are very interesting. I believe, my data may not be so precise. Back in 1995, Taiwan's GDP per capita probably is 120% of Korea's. Hong Kong's GDP per capita probably was 120% of Singapore's back in 1995. If you look at what happened over the last 20 years, that the 20% ratio just changed. Korea is 120% Taiwan. Singapore is 100% of Hong Kong. We know exactly the reason behind it. We don't have to say that. Okay, the reason is China, very clearly. Okay, the key explanation variable is China. Okay. China in four-dimensional glance, I try to provide some longer-term perspective. China is a large economy, so there is still space to grow, and there is the gravity model applies. China's east coast in China, as I say, is Europe. China's Europe, not Europe. Let's be clear, is right. China's interior part and the west, China's Africa. Okay, so there's a huge gap between East Coast and the interior and the west part. So the gravity model can continue to apply, and there is also a lot of space. Industrialization, urbanization will continue to play a key role. That's the first point we need to keep in mind. Secondly, China is still a developing country. GDP per capita 12% of U.S. level. Okay, we need to keep that in mind. So there is still a long way to catch up, why industrialization and urbanization. China's open population ratio is about 55% of the total population. That's including those who have hukou and those who do not have hukou. If you think about those who have a proper, open permit, the number is about 35% of total population. Okay, so if you reform the hukou system, I think that will boost, open consumption, and would also allow the rural resident to permanently settle in the open area. Bring their family there, and let the kids to go to local school, and so on and so forth. So China has a long way to go along that line. The third important area I want to say that China is a transition economy with strong government. Okay, it's an economy in transition. It started with the old central planning, and the government is quite effective. When government understand policy, and the government is under strong leadership. Okay, I think that's something I want to keep in mind. I travel around the world and talk to international investors. A lot of them, of course, worry about China's risk, financial risk. And there's one point I want to bring up, which is that China is probably overinsured. I'll tell you why it's overinsured. One analogy I try to use is the following. Here's a new driver, okay, who never has a car before, who bought a new car, maybe rented a car, I don't know, and then drive on the highway. He never driven on the highway before. Given that, let's call he's a new driver, he never had a car before, and never drive before. Of course, there was his car was never stolen by anyone. He never hit anyone. There was no fatal accident. He couldn't have, drunk and driving, and because this is a new driver, let me put it that way. Okay. the new driver bought all insurance, as if his car was stolen 3 times, as if he hit someone and caused serious, damage, maybe 3 times. That's where China is. Okay. I tell you what I mean by that. If you look at the household sector, as I said, that household sector total amount deposited about 80% of GDP. The total amount of household debt is about less than 40%. So there's an extra 40% saving in the household sector. Non-financial sector, in China, as I said, that the leverage ratio is high. The total amount of debt is about 144%. If you take away that, they deposited something like that, of course, the situation would be better, but not so much better. I'll come back to that. Government sector, for example, government sector has a huge amount of saving. If you look at the government sector total amount of deposit in China, 70% of GDP. People worry about China's government borrowing. Okay? If you think about the total government amount of debt, you subtract the total amount of government deposit, end up in positive 50% of GDP. Okay, I mean, this is all public information. If you add the number, you subtract the number, you can tell. All sectors except the corporate sector are overinsured in China, hugely. China is a transition economy, is undergoing serious reform, and the new economy sector, in my view, is emerging. If you believe in China's stock market, the stock market already provide forward as a vote, okay, in the following sense. The old economy, which is more or less the SOE index, the new economy, all privately owned. In service sector, not so much in the manufacturing sector. In technology sector, so privately owned, technology, service, okay? They outperform the old economy a lot. That's another chart I mentioned to you, I want to show you. Even you think about the debt ratio, the private sector debt is not serious, okay? It's really the public sector debt, SOE, that is worrisome. And in a way that the urbanization will continue to be a key driver for China's growth going forward. The average household income between urban resident and rural residents is about 3 or 4 to 1. There's a huge income gap in China. Okay, so if China can support urbanization, I believe that that can not only help address the income issue, the income gap issue, but also can support China's economy continue to grow towards more consumption and also generate the additional demand for housing, for infrastructure investment, and so on and so forth. Okay, I wouldn't go to the detailed regressions part. Yeah. So let's talk about the reform, the main reform agenda after the party's third planning. I think that the 2 key directions of reform outlined clearly in the manifesto is 1, market will play a decisive role in allocation of resources. Okay, China's transition economy is moving towards market economy. Okay, that's I think that's the point. Secondly, economic development will need to benefit all people to a greater extent and in a more equitable manner. The key driver, the key way to achieve this is not through taxation. It's mainly move people, support people to migrate from the countryside to the urban area. That's the key. And then to provide the needed, Medicare, pension, minimum at the low to the low end of I think that those will be the key priority. Here I list all the areas of reform, including SOE reform, changes in the government role, fiscal and taxation reform, land reform, new round of opening up, and the easing family plan policy and financial reform, and so on and so forth. at least there's, 1, 2, 3, 4, about 7 top reform, agendas. One way to read that is bottom up. Okay, one way to read it. Okay, financial reform is already is driving China's reform, as you can tell, in the stock market, in the banking sector, and so on and so forth. This manifesto was issued about 2 years ago. Okay, this year China reformed the family planning policy. That's done by now. A new round of opening up. What is that? Renminbi's accession into SDR basket. Okay. In my view, the importance of renminbi joining SDR could be as important as China's joining WTO in terms of opening up. When China joined WTO, I think that decision helped China's manufacturing sector to be integrated with the rest of the world. I think that the effect is phenomenal, quite phenomenal. Okay. The new round of reform, China's renminbi joining the SDR basket, in my view, will help China's service sector to be integrated with the rest of the world. Some of you in the audience work in law firm or financial sector. I think that in my view that you can benefit from China's new round of opening up in the service sector. If China want to basically push for urbanization, China will. I think that some kind of land reform will be needed, because otherwise the peasant wouldn't have enough endowment to even put forward as down payment to buy a small flat in any of the urban area. Okay, then there is a lot to go, and fiscal and taxation reform. Part of the problem is really China really need to redefine the relationship between central government and the local government in terms of how much tax one can collect. Local government rely a lot on land sale, okay, previously to supplement whatever they tax revenue shortfall. That will need to be changed, okay. And so I think that we can, if we have questions, we can in Q&A session we can go over this. Financial reform, I think that I mentioned 3. One is the market system. Second is money rates, and third is financial regulation. Okay, financial regulation. I think that really that the government will relax many of the restrictions in financial regulation, and meanwhile, I think the government will need to develop more solid, more sound, solid regulatory framework. The financial service, basically that. In China is growing, as I said, that is where China should be going to. Okay, household savings initially were heavily invested in property sector, and that's I think that going forward I think it probably will be not so wise. That's number one. Number two, I think that parking all the household savings in the banking sector probably won't be wise either. So they really need to get into financial products. So financial products, of course, one of the problems is that I think the boundary is blurry between investment bank and bank, between wealth management products. Is that a bank? Should that be regulated by banking regulator? Should that be regulated by security regulator? Okay, so you have all kind of problems. Okay. I think that's very challenging, but I think China is an area China need to address. Okay, in terms of money rate, of course, it's interest rate liberalization. Okay, interest rate will heavily regulate by central bank. I think the central bank not only provide guidance, so I think that in a way that the banks going forward. They make their own decision about the lending rate and deposit rate, so on and so forth. They can charge a high rate, they can charge a low rate, so that there will be increasing competition. in that area. But then, banks are regulated by banking regulators. Okay, some of the trustee companies, they can do more or less the same thing. Who should regulate those trustee companies? So on and so forth, okay? So I think that there are many, many challenges there. And also that in terms of, in terms of money rate, one is the interest rate, one is the exchange rate, the two key rates, okay? Given the current market pressures, renminbi probably will need to devalue somewhat. For a developing country, if your currency is, is on the path of devaluation, you'll be facing another problem. Where is the equilibrium? The market would overshoot. We all know that from Rudy Dump's paper. The overshoot in particular is more serious for a developing country when exchange rate is on the path of devaluation. The floor is very hard to find. I think that those are challenges, okay? Here I list the 13th five-year plan, again, based on public information, but you wouldn't be able to read it anyway. That's just too many words in one slide. I'm sorry about that, yeah. Basically, that the key points are still listed here, okay, in terms of the, which is that China will need to seriously reform the state-owned sector. China will need to redefine the government role, i.e., there's let the market to play a decisive role. Okay, which is the first one. Market playing a decisive role in allocation of resources. In China's policy circle, I participate in some of the discussions. I think that a buzzword coming up in the last month or so is so-called supply-side economics. Okay, supply-side economics, we know that is basically that is during the Reagan year and Mrs. Thatcher's year, and basically that in particular in the U.S. and U.K. they pushed hard on that side on the supply-side reform. I think that in China now this become a buzzword. Not in Europe or in the U.S. I haven't heard that buzzword for quite some time. Okay, in my view, that it shows that the eagerness and readiness of the government want to really push for SOE reform and government reform. Okay, let me stop here. Those are, again, my personal views, and this is, of course, is a good platform for us to have an exchange. And again, I really appreciate the Institute for Global Economics for inviting me, and I appreciate Vice President Sun and Professor Cho, and also President Sarkon to invite me. And thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Huang, for presenting a comprehensive and deep analysis on where Chinese economy is standing now, and for sharing your insight and views on future economic reform prospect. Now the floor is open. Let me tell you one thing, that Dr. Huang is not able to entertain individual interview requests by the media, but he will be happy to take questions from the media in the floor. So if you have any questions, please make it here in the floor, because you would not have a chance to ask a question later. Okay, let me take 2 or 3 questions in groups. Dr. Hong, please.
Thank you very much for your nice explanation and perspective of China's economy. I have, first of all, would you turn over next pages of that path to economic financial reform? Minor question. First one is here your FX reserves will holding increasing RMB issuance, bond issuance 2% plus 2%. What do you mean? That's a minor question, first one. Second one is everybody now know China has a very vigorous vital plan, especially to invest into infrastructure overseas, such as AIIV and New Silk Road, and these projects will require a huge amount of capital. But as you indicate that already China has a highest leverage ratio, the debt ratio, either government and corporate and so on. But in a coming future, to support of these vast infrastructure investment, I think it requires quite a lot of financing. Do you have any idea without the increasing kind of problems to meet of these financing on the present high ratio of leverage? Everyone, some analysts predict that will be one of China's greatest problems and so on. How do you foresee? That's my question. Thank you.
Okay.
I'm sorry, we'll take one more question.
sure.
Chairman Kim.
Thank you, Dr. Fang. I have two questions. Number one is the growth of China. You showed about 6.9, 6.8% growth, which is the standard GDP as announced by the government. However, there are some alternative views, people who take it very skeptical view that it's, and taking extreme view is the Li Keqiang index of about something like 3%. And another view is would be that is a little too severe because it ignores service sectors and taking somewhere between about 5%. What is your view on those alternative considerations? Another one is as China now is part of this RBM. It requires, of course, China's economy, as you showed, will be doing a lot of reforms approaching international standard. Now, this poses a huge challenge in that, first of all, the large economies have a very limited ability to control, because to a large extent, when you change the interest rates, etc., one of the benefits is your ability to interact with the rest of the economy. When yourself is so big, the benefit you can derive is small. And in addition, when you showed A share versus H share PE ratio, the huge differential indicates these are the results of the restrictions on flow of capital. When it is limited, it is lifted, the adjustment is enormous. Now, consequence of the two would be that the government's ability to control its own fate would be significantly diminished. How do you see that as the consequence? Thank you.
Okay. Two questions? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Actually, 4 questions.
Okay, 4 questions. I know. Yeah. Maybe I stand here so that I can use the slides. But yeah, those are the important questions. Maybe I change the order. I answer your question first, then to you. Yeah. First of all, on China's growth rate. Our estimate, our forecast for this year is about 6.9%, and next year 6.8%. And actually, we believe that in 2017, China's growth rate will also be about 6.8%, which is why I say that it's about to stabilize. You mentioned that there is there are alternative views about where China's growth rate will be. And some people say that they use the Li Keqiang index, then they believe that the growth rate will probably be even lower. As we know that the Li Keqiang index, the people use it basically electricity, growth rate of electricity is right, and the growth rate of credit, and the growth rate of railway transportation. That index was more relevant as probably an indicator of the growth rate 5 years ago or maybe 10 years ago. The reason is very clear. That is, China's growth, China's economy is moving towards a consumption-based. If you think about the heavy industry, of course, you need a lot of transportation. Railway, you need a lot of electricity to make steel, to make aluminum, all that. It's more or less heavy industry based. And Prime Minister Lee never said, he said this is the index. You know that the people coined this term when he was the party secretary of Liaoning province. Liaoning province is very close to Korea, as you know. It's a heavy industry area. For heavy industry area, then I try to understand, how the local economy is doing, I think those really were relevant. For China as a whole, in particular, after so many years of the continued growth, China's moving towards more consumption-based. Indeed, consumption's contribution to GDP is over 50%. Okay, so I think that if you think about consumption, you don't really need much of electricity, frankly speaking, or technology. IT, how much electricity does it consume? And meanwhile, that railway transportation, basically that in the index is railway is the goods transportation. If you look at the passenger in the railway, high-speed train, growth rate 20% year on year. Okay, so I think that the index capture a portion of the economy and probably a portion of the older economy. So nowadays, people continue to use the old index to capture a portion of the economy. They don't understand the economy, in my view. I mean, that's some of the analysts. I think that's my first response. So we believe that as China continue to move to consumption growth rate will need to come down. And meanwhile, that also the manufacturing sector and the heavy industry sector will grow much slower. Indeed, it probably will have negative growth. So the credit growth to that sector will also need to come down. And if anything, they need to do deleveraging. Yeah, okay. So the leverage up would be on the consumption sector and for the new economy, not from the old manufacturing heavy industry, but from the technology, from service based. Okay, so I think that's the second one. In terms of that, who would finance if China want to invest in, let's say that in the infrastructure sector abroad? Who would provide the financing? China has more than enough savings to finance it. Okay, I said that China's own corporate sector, in my view, the leverage ratio is a little too high. It's not the highest. If I said the highest, I think that probably I misspoke. I said that for all emerging markets, the leverage ratio went up. China's not the worst in this number one. Number two, I showed you another figure, which is SOE sector's leverage ratio went up, but the private sector is doing okay. So, so basically that if you think about the government sector and the household sector, you think about the total amount of reserves China has, okay? I think that in terms of financing is never a problem in China. Okay, it's not a problem. China does not really need international liquidity to finance its domestic investment or consumption. China has been a net capital exporting country for quite some time. China will continue to export capital to the rest of the world. Okay, I think that, so for that, I'm less concerned. Okay. In terms of the question about financial reform, there was something about this plan. There's let's ignore the 2%, which is a minor issue. Okay. I think that in terms of the financial reform, to what extent that financial reform, or also that for large economy, whether the government will be effective, whether to what extent that the growth rate will be sustainable. I want to bring this up, or maybe I want to bring this up. You need to take into consideration of the stage where China is. 12% of the US GDP per capita. Okay, also a huge country with vast land, industrialization, urbanization will continue to play a key role. So I think that China is still at the catching up stage. China's growth rate would need to moderate somewhat, but I think that infrastructure investment, industrialization, urbanization will continue to be key driver down the road. Okay. In terms of
it's index.
U.S. The red dot is the U.S. The red dot, the U.S. is U.S. I keep every year. I divide every country's GDP per capita to U.S. level.
Then what is Korea over there 48.9% in the legend?
Which part?
49% of U.S. per capita income.
49. Korea's GDP per capita is 49%.
per capita
U.S.
is,
per capita.
okay.
Yeah.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, per capita. This is per capita. This is GDP per capita. No, this is nominal. It's not all nominal. It's all nominal. Yeah, it's not a PP based. Yes, it's all nominal. Yeah. So basically that China is still at this. So basically China maybe is 20 years behind Korea, okay, or maybe it's longer, depending on how you measure it. You see what I mean? That's the point I'm trying to make. Okay. So at that time, what was Korea's growth rate? Okay. At that time, what was Korea's urbanization ratio? Okay, I think that's the point. That's a simple point I try to make. Financial reform. I think there are many issues we should discuss. Financial reform is not that easy. In a way that I think that Professor Cho and I were discussing. I think that maybe this round of reform is more challenging than in China than before. I think that China's interest. China, first of all, among all transition economies, China took something different road, so-called gradualism. China never buy in this Big Bang or that was shock therapy. So it would be going forward, forcefully push forward, taking a gradual step. Okay. But if you think about the interest rate liberalization, China is more or less there. Okay. In the sense that the PBOC provide a guidance, and then on whatever the guiding rate, and the banks, commercial bank can change its rate within 40% up and 40% down. That's more or less enough. So they widen the band. So in a way, people give you some kind of, not a floor or a central line, then you can go up or go down 40%. And I think that going forward, that probably will be increased to 100%. Then it will become irrelevant. 100% people, you guys can freely compete. I mean, so it doesn't really matter. But then central bank will still need to control some rate, repo rate or interbank market some rate to affect the economy, to control inflation But I think that China will be getting there. Another important rate, of course, is on the exchange rate. Exchange rate is more challenging because that's mainly related to outside sector, is right, external sector. There, the problem is really the market like to bet in one direction at one time. When the market bet in one direction at one time, there is overshooting. That's inevitable. If the market cheer up for an emerging market economy, the exchange rate goes up so quickly, overshoot. So basically, if the market is thinking about that one emerging market is not doing well, and Korea went through that in '98. Remember, there is free fall, but that's the market. That's the market phenomenon, and that is very very hard to manage. I think. Korea went through that process, very painful. I mean, that's very, very difficult. China will have to face that kind of challenge. That's very difficult.
Okay, Dr. Zhang. And then next, Mr. Lee.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I'm Yang Lok Jung from Seoul National University, and also I appreciate the excellent presentation of Dr. Huang. I have basically two questions. The first question is, to some extent, China, similar to other Asian countries' development, and what it means, the external sector of the China is very high. I think, but it is to some extent, misleading the understanding of Chinese economic development. So, do you have any effective or actual external sector contribution to the whole Chinese economic development? Do you have any reliable index or whatever? This is my first question, because I calculated the external sector based on the employment of the joint ventures in China, and this is very small in portion. And also, foreign direct investment, contribution to the capital accumulation in China is also very limited. But if you look at the figures of the total trade to the GDP, it is almost 40%. That means, we have some misunderstanding that China is similar to the other Asian countries, depending on external sector promotion growth. This is my first question. The second question is, since Chinese RMB becomes one of the SDR basket, I think, foreign exchange reserve accumulation of China is too much. Do you have any optimal size of the foreign exchange reserve accumulation in China? That's my questions. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Mr.
Hi. Thank you very much for this morning's lecture. I have simple questions, I think. Of the 6.8, 6.7% growth rate, what is the portion of dependency on global market versus China's internal market? And you said the U.S. seems to be ready to leverage up again, and all the developing countries will have to deleverage by choice or default. But it seems that, according to your lecture, China is doing okay. But do you think the other developing economies deleveraging, when will that be? We don't know, but do you think that would affect China's growth rate in the future? And the other question is, recently there has been many pictures of the effect of China's growth on environment, and the picture of Beijing's air pollution or quality has been making news all over the world. Do you think that aspect will have any effect on future China's growth? Thank you.
Okay.
Can I take four questions at a time? Or you want me to take more questions? Yeah.
Why don't I take just one more
Okay,
question?
sure. Okay,
and
sure.
then
Yeah.
answer?
Yeah. Good.
Well, thank you for your very comprehensive presentation. This is the first time, I think, in the last year or two, the speaker didn't mention shadow banking, unreliable statistics, or things like that. And then, having listened to your presentation, I think you gave a very good view of the forest, whereas I think previous speakers focused too much on the trees. You mentioned at the beginning of the presentation that the Chinese success over the last 4 decades really summed up in two aspects. You said internal reform and external opening up. And in answering some of the questions you mentioned, China has been doing gradualistic approach in general. But then it seems like you're using big external events like the accession to the WTO, and now the integration of the Chinese yuan into the SDR basket of currencies as a shock. So you have a gradualistic approach accompanied by periodic big bang, whatever term you want to use, very successfully. So now that you have integrated your manufacturing sector into the global economy, now you're moving on the second stage and trying to integrate the services sector into the global economy. And this is really more reflection on the Korean side. What is Korea doing? I mean, listening to your presentation, I think we've done similarly and successfully over until about 5 to 10 years ago. I think we are now having roadblocks on both fronts. We're not doing very well on internal reform, and we're really not doing very well on external opening up in terms of the financial services sector in particular. So you may not be the right person, but you have any thoughts on, and you said China may be 20 years behind Korea? I say, hell no, you're not 20 years behind. I think we're falling behind China now. So.
No, that can't be. No, that can't
Thank
be.
you.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. There have been already quite a few questions, but may I just following Professor Chung's question on exchange rate policy, may I add one more question?
Of course, yeah.
That, now China still has a huge current account surplus, but at the same time, huge capital outflow. Now becoming one of the SDR basket currencies. I guess China has three options in exchange rate policies. One is, as it used to do, try to intervene in the market using its huge foreign reserve and cap the level of exchange rate in the current level. Second, now, I mean, you have done that for a while, and as a result, the foreign exchange reserve has been substantially reduced to 3.4 trillion, almost
Yeah.
a half trillion
Yeah.
dollars. And I guess the second option would be gradually allow the exchange rate to grind down, reflecting capital outflow. And third option could be let it float in the market. I guess the ultimate, I mean, the direction will be, at this point, will be substantial depreciation. If that happened, I guess the country which would be most affected will be Korea. And I would like to know which option, in your view, would China take on exchange rate?
Okay, very good. Yeah. Those are very important questions. All are very important. Namely, the first question and Ms. Lee's question related to the I think many questions are related. Let's start with the external sector first. What are the external sectors' contribution to China's economy? Okay, that's a very, very important question. There are different ways to measure it and a different way to quantify it and a different way to see it, depending on what kind of perspective. Number one, think about the net export contribution, or the growth of net export contribution to GDP growth. Before 2007, 2008, out of the 10%, let's say 10% GDP growth, about 1.5%, some year even 2%, it come from the net export sector. So that 10%, 1.5% and 2% come from net export sector. After, let's say, this year's 6.9% GDP growth rate, what is the net export sector's contribution to China's GDP growth? 0 and negative. For the last 2 years, minus 0.5%, minus 0.3%. This year probably is minus 0.2% and close to 0%. It's not because China's export growth this year outperformed last year, because China import less. Oil, where is oil price? Okay, so basically that for China as an economy that is quite integrated to the rest of the world. However, China is a large economy. Okay, China needs to import a lot of commodities and others, and China exports some of the relative to Korea low end consumption and maybe in middle low end some of the manufacture. Okay, not as good as Samsung but we start to export Samsung. Okay, Huawei so but basically that in terms of GDP contribution, our rest of the world to China, this is a large economy phenomenon. One would need to compare China with the United States. China is not the US. I mean, use that kind of framework. US is quite integrated to the rest of the world. But the rest of the world does not affect the US that much, frankly speaking. US is pretty much a domestic economy. Okay? Despite the US economy is so much integrated to the rest of the world. Why? Domestic consumption, domestic investment drive everything. China's not that yet. But much of that, going forward, China's domestic consumption, domestic investment will drive the domestic growth. Meanwhile, China need to open up through, exchange with reservoir for ideas, investment. I mean, China will need to invest into the reservoir. China want to continue to attract the foreign direct investment into China. China need to import, basically goods, commodity, oil, and China export something. So that kind of flow will continue to go up, I hope. But relative to the size of GDP, will become less and less important. Okay, and in terms of net contribution of our, export sector to China going forward will be, in my view, in the range of positive 0.5% to minus 0.5%. In that range, it will never go beyond 1% in one way or the other. Okay, so it's more or less zero. Okay, that's one way to see it. That is only one perspective. Opening up is so important to China. The contribution is far more than what would be justified by, let's say, 1%, even positive 1% GDP growth rate. Why? Without opening up, some of the reform cannot be implemented. Without the opening up, some of the idea cannot be adopted. So that even for the U.S., that's very, very important. So another aspect to look at the external sector to China, of course, is the credit sector. When China started with, opening up, of course, whatever the foreign proceeds, as I said, export own, the sale to banks, banks sale to central bank, and those bring in high credit worthiness, because other kind of loan domestically initially will not have much credit worthiness. The counterparty risk, other risks were too high. Okay, of course, the credit worthiness in China has been improved, but still the external play a very, very important role. So you can adopt a different perspective, but I think that the importance of opening up is far more important than whatever could be justified by GDP per se. By GDP per se, it becomes less important. Okay, that's number one. Number two, in terms of the foreign reserve, and Professor Chu also mentioned this question. Maybe I can combine the two. Before 2008. I like to compare China with Germany. I like to compare China and Germany now. Okay, what had happened between 2008 and now? The external positions of two countries just swapped. Before 2008, China's current account surplus reached 7% of GDP. Okay, trade surplus, slightly below that. If you look at Germany at that time, Germany's current account surplus was about 3-4% of GDP, okay, and basically much lower than China. If you look at China's current account trade surplus, all that now, all below 3%, as you can tell. Where's Germany's current account surplus? Over 10% now, okay. So basically that before 2007, every year China add a huge amount of foreign reserves because you have a huge, trade surplus, current account surplus. And now basically all that is moderating. So I think that in terms of the reserves, I think that the peak of the reserve is behind us already. Peak almost $4 trillion. I think it will continue to wind down to some extent. In terms of options going forward, Professor Cho outlined 3 options. In my view, probably the second option will be more likely. I'm a market economist, okay? I don't think that China is willing or is also in international community's interest to let RMB to devalue 40% in the short run. If RMB were to devalue 40%, most of the Asian economy will be that would be serious. That would be very, very serious to everyone. I don't think it's in China's interest. It's not, nor in the international community interest. So in that regard, it would still be a kind of gradualist approach. I say that China like to take a gradualist approach, but once in a while, China needs to push something big, right? So in a way that of course, the 2001 WTO is a major push for opening up. And this year's SDR is also a major push. So one way to think about the gradualism approach is the following. You take a gradual approach, then every 10 years or so, you jump in one big step. I think that's probably the way to think about China. I believe China will continue to take that. When China's ready, China wants to take a big push. Remember when China were discussing with WTO to join the WTO, there was huge internal debate. The pressures for politicians in China were huge, because many of the industry lobby very hard, say that we will be slaughtered by WTO, because everything will be gone. Okay, it did not really happen. Okay, many sectors take a very heavy beat and they survive. Okay, if you look at the car industry in China, in Beijing, in Shanghai, there are all kinds of cars in China. Hyundai, Korean cars, Japanese cars, German, French, basically all brand names, everything, everyone went to China. China's own so-called car industry take a heavy beat. They all now become joint venture. Otherwise, they couldn't survive. Okay. But for the car industry as a whole, probably that's it's not necessarily bad. But different people have different view. Even in China, say that some claim that in China's whole car industry collapsed. But I don't take that view. Okay, I think that opening up is good, and so in a way that once in a while China would want to commit a big jump when China's ready, but more or less it would be gradually. I think that the capital outflows in China will continue. As I said, that China has become a net capital exporting country, and that will be China will remain that for quite some time. Because with the high savings rate in China, with the investment opportunity in China, and I think that I think that for household investors, for others to diversify, I think it will all be helpful. A quick comment on Korea. I'm not an expert on Korea, so I'm not here to advise what Korea should do. So I'm here to learn from Korea, from you, and want to hear from you what China should be doing. I say that in many areas China is behind Korea 20, 30 years or so. So I think that Korea has been a shining example for China. So I think that so I'm here to learn. Okay, in terms of, I said that. If you compare Korea's growth with Taiwan and Singapore with Korea and Taiwan are similar to some extent, and Singapore and Hong Kong are similar, city-state in a way. I think that since 1995, as I said already, Korea has made a phenomenal progress in that regard, in a way that Korea capture all the opportunities that the world afford. That's very, very important. I think that. Much of growth previously was from the U.S. Korea had a very good relationship with the U.S., with Western, and much of growth for the last 20 years came from China. And Korea, also helped China. Meanwhile, benefited from China's growth. And I think that's China like to also further enhance the relationship with Korea, and the relationship between the two countries is very well. So. The two presidents shake hands and they visit each other, and so the exchange between the corporate sectors and the academic community, the investment bank community, I think it's all very good. Yeah, and I'm here to learn from Korea.
Okay, thank you.
Environmental, yeah. Environmental, I want to provide a very quick comment. Environmental is a constraint for China. China will need to be very seriously to address the environmental issue. China is seriously addressing the environmental issue. Remember that 20 years ago, what was the main environmental concern? Say, if you live in Beijing or you look from Beijing, is the sandstone from the Gobi Desert all the way blue, all the way sometime to Korea, okay, sometime to all the way to Beijing, okay, you can tell. That problem has been more or less contained. How? China planted so many trees in Inner Mongolia, in all that area. In my view, that China is seriously addressing this issue through investment, through reduction of the polluters, so on and so forth. 10 years, let's evaluate that. I think the problem more or less could be contained. Okay. You will probably will need to give China some time. I think that's, to me, it won't be a binding constraint, because the government fully realize that if you think about the next 5-year plan, the 5 priorities, I focus more or less on the economic sector, on financial sector in particular. One of the 5 top priorities is environmental protection, to develop a growth model that is sustainable. So I think that if you look at, I think that 10 years, I'm hopeful that in 10 years the problem can be contained. If not completely resolved, be effectively deal with.
Okay, now we have to give chance to people from media. There are 2 questions from media, from 연합인포맥스 and 조선일보. So will you please say your name and identify your affiliation, please? Yes, please.
저는 연합인포맥스의 한종화 기자라고 하고요. 오늘 강연 중에 이제 위안화 절하에 대해서 말씀을 해주셨는데, 그러면 위안화 절하를 해야 된다는 그런 입장이신지 먼저 하나 묻고 싶고요. 그 다음에 이제 아까 말씀하셨을 때 40%는 이제 적절하지 않다 이런 식으로 말씀하셨는데, 그러면은 그런 적절한 절하의 폭은 어느 정도라고 생각하시는지 그 2가지 질문 여쭙고 싶습니다. 감사합니다.
조선일보에서 오신 분.
예고했는데 그에 따른 지금 중국 정부나 이런 쪽의 대처 방안이 구체적으로 어떻게 되고 있는지, 그리고 IMF에서 일하셨는데 그 블룸버그에서 최근에 다음 SDR 후보로 한국의 원화가 가장 유력하다라고 보도를 했는데 그에 대한 의견이 어떠신지 두 가지 여쭙겠습니다. 조선일보 이혜훈 기자입니다.
The first question, if I understand, I say that, on renminbi, to what extent the renminbi should devalue, or whether 40%, I said 40% is not appropriate, what would that be? I want to clarify that. I don't want to be quoted to say that I predict renminbi would devalue 40%, I won't be able to return to Beijing if we do that. No. I never said that. I want to clarify that. Okay, so that's what one of the reasons is that I typically don't want to be interviewed. Is that sometimes I got misquoted. I'm very afraid of that. I don't want to. Yeah. So I think that now I want to clarify. I never say that RMB will devalue 40%. That will be that. Make that point clear. On renminbi, there are 2 exchange rates on renminbi in a way. One, of course, is the Shanghai interbank market rate. Okay, that's it's the onshore rate. One is, of course, the offshore rate, which is in Hong Kong. I work in Hong Kong. The Hong Kong offshore rate is deregulated, and much of the exchange rate, will facilitate through so-called NDF, non-delivery forwards, right? So let's say that Professor Chu and I can write a contract bilaterally, just between us. Okay, we can set the rate at whatever level we both feel comfortable. Okay, so in a way that the transaction volume is very small, and the market is very illiquid, and then basically is pretty much a OTC market, over-the-counter market. Okay. So in a way that if you believe in that market, small market, illiquid, OTC driven, the exchange rate can be anywhere. Okay. I don't think that's the right market to understand China's exchange rate, because there are players there who want to benefit from that one way or the other. Another general phenomenon, even as I said, even with a deep market, okay, with proper instrument, you also have this problem of overshooting in one way or the other. So when an economy, emerging market economy in particular, when the economy is doing well, the market would cheer up the exchange rate would overvalue so much, too much, overshooting. When an emerging market is not doing well, the market would basically put the pressure on devaluations and then overshooting again. Look at the Korea during Asian financial crisis. You see what I mean? So in a way that let's say that if a government has means, and also the government needs to communicate the confidence to the market, I think that in a volatile situation, the intervention from the central bank is warranted. I think that even if the IMF would not disagree with that, is right. I mean, so in a view that given that the huge amount of reserve China is having, I don't think that RMB would have a serious devaluation problem. That's number one. Never call me say 40%. You know, I don't think RMB would have with a serious devalue. Okay, so given that RMB joined the SDR or will join SDR in October next year, and one of the conditions is freely usable, i.e. that it requires RMB to use a market-based exchange rate. So RMB will need between now and October next year move more towards the market base. But we need to clarify what is the market base. I believe that the market base cannot be narrowly interpreted, be based on two bilateral party transactions, OTC, long delivery forward. That, you know, we can basically, you give some of the market player a huge power of manipulation, which is not the right way. Okay? So I think that in a way that we should be able to find a way to define the market before October next year. I think that I think that the RMB will increase flexibility somewhat. I don't see a RMB would devalue significantly, or I think even in the current situation. That's number one. Number two. One way to read this is basically that you think about RMB in the SDR basket, is right? The SDR basket has the US dollar, has yen, Japanese yen, has euro and pound sterling. Okay, US dollar is strengthening to some extent recently, but recently is the last few months. If you look at the recent week, US dollar also weakened somewhat. Yen is devalued a lot. Continue on that path, in my view. Euro is devaluing a lot. Continue on that path. I said that if you look at Germany's current account surplus, one of the reasons is Germany is helped by the euro devaluation very clearly. Where's the euro exchange rate now against the dollar? Where was the euro exchange rate against dollar nominal before 2007? Euro devalued 20-30%. Okay, renminbi meanwhile appreciated against, if you think about the real effective exchange rate, but 50%. Okay, I have a chart here. So in a way that I think that one would need to think about not just the renminbi exchange rate with the dollar, but probably renminbi exchange rate with the whole basket. Okay, and then as I said that if you think about the other emerging market currencies, Mexican peso, Chilean peso, okay, Thai baht, and others, okay, renminbi, in my view, in that regard, will also be a strong currency, not a weak currency. Even if renminbi would fluctuate somewhat towards the, so I think that's my second point, okay. On this SDR, I think that in my view, I'm not representing China. I'm a market economist. Okay, I think that I also worked like Professor Chow worked as an IMF. I think that IMF needs reform. International currency system needs reform. The international governance system needs reform. International financial system needs reform. So I would support my personal view. I would support that if we create a SDR, if IMF want to use SDR as a appropriate representative of reserve currency, freely usable, I would support SDR to enlarge, to include other emerging market currencies, other developed country currencies. So.
Okay, thank you. Since he would not be able to go back to China today, so please make sure that his statement is not misquoted. Okay?
I would really appreciate that, yeah.
One final question from 중앙일보.
예, 중앙일보 하연옥 기자입니다. 아까 발표 내용 잘 들었고요. 말씀하신 부분 중에 중국의 가장 위험한 요인 중에 하나가 기업 부채라고 얘기를 하셨습니다. 그리고 이제 최근의 상황에서 그 레버리지 비율이 높아졌기 때문에 디레버리지 과정에서 더 위험이나 이런 리스크에 직면할 수 있다고 언급을 하셨는데요. 이제 지난 올 초에 이제 중국 주식시장 굉장히 그 고공행진을 할 때 그런 것들을 좀, 그러니까 그런 여러 가지 요인 중에 하나가 중국의 높은 어떤 기업 부채를 좀 줄이기 위해서 간접금융 비율을 높이기 위한 그런 것들에 대한 얘기도 있었는데요. 그 중국의 어떤 기업 부채 비율을 낮추기 위한 정책적인 뭐 어떤 수단을 중국이 구사할 수 있을지 보시는지, 아니면 그냥 어떤 시장 내부에서 어떤 요인으로 인해서 그런 문제들을 해결하도록 중국이 둘 거라고 보시는지, 그런 부분이 좀 궁금합니다.
The question is on corporate sector's deleveraging and what kind of policies would be from government perspective. I think that the corporate sector, in particular SOEs, will need to do deleveraging very clearly. I think I have a chart here show there's a debt ratio of non-SOE versus debt ratio of SOE. There are several means that the government is employing, and also the market is pushing. One, of course, China needs to develop deeper capital markets, i.e., going forward more equity financing. Okay, and also that for maybe more bond issuance for those who have a credit rating and good enough, not necessarily just borrow from banks. So basically, borrow directly from the market, equity financing in particular. Okay. So basically, that for medium-sized companies, remember that Beijing opened a new third port this year, which China is developing its own NASDAQ to some extent. Okay, for technology companies. Okay, so that they don't have to rely on too much on banking financing on debt, so they can basically go directly at the early stage to an equity market to raise capital. So that's one way, and that's doing well. And if that's if you think about the so-called new economy I mentioned, the new economy consists of that, and actually the valuation of the technology sector in China is much higher than the non-technology, or in particular the SOEs. Okay, so that's one area. That's I think the both market and government are pushing. Secondly, I think for SOE reform. SOE reform, I think that given that they are state-owned, okay, I think that going forward, I believe that one way or the other, the government will have to take a pain to basically to shut down some of the factories, shut down some of the companies, or restructure some of the companies. And I think that China did it in 1990s, okay. In 1990s, if you think about it, well, they reform basically, why, let's say that the growth rate come down so much. First of all, China was hit by serious inflation, then was paying for restructuring. I think that it's time for the government to do restructuring again, serious restructuring of the state-owned sector. Fortunately, that the state-owned sector's portion is much smaller in the economy. Okay, consumption accounts for over 50% of GDP. SOE's contribution to GDP is probably about 30% or less. Okay, SOE's employment contribution to GDP is less than 10%. Okay, so in the 90s there was 70%. When China started in 1978, except the rural society, okay, rural were not that much state-owned was and also agriculture sector accounted for 15% GDP. So you could say that 80% of GDP was all state-owned, more or less, okay, when China started. So now I think that the maneuver, China has the most space to maneuver, okay. So the private sector continue to add new jobs, and meanwhile, I think that the deleveraging process is a process, okay. I don't think China want to take this so-called shock therapy right away. China's not ready to take that. China can afford the time. China has the space. China probably, this is a multi-year process. For the multi-year process, I think that as I said, equity market need to play a role. Okay, then basically that restructuring will play a role, and then basically that maybe by the way, the government also the third area I want to mention is so-called PPP. Which is not a purchasing power parity, is called a public-private sector partnership. The Ministry of Finance in China is campaigning for this very hard, i.e., given that the indebtedness of the public sector or the SOE is so high, some SOE can basically start a joint venture with the private sector, not only to bring down the indebtedness, but also to change the ownership, okay, to create the right incentive. So I think that going forward, the key to solve the problem, of course, is through restructuring. In terms of restructuring, I think the key is to internal reform. Well, indeed. That's why I mentioned that a buzzword that is, basically a lot of people are talking about in Beijing is the so-called supply side economics. I think that which, we all understand, which is focused entirely on the, a structural issue and, including, taxation reform, including, the public-private partnership or private-public partnership, whatever we call it, PPP. Yeah. So that I think that there is a long way for China to go along this reform and also opening up. I think the key driver for China, key drivers are continue internal reform and external opening up, and China has a long way to go. Again, those are my personal views, and I really appreciate the opportunity and the Professor Cho to chair this breakfast presentation, and I really appreciate your advice and your comments, and all views are my own. And for all the media friends, I really appreciate it. Number one, I think you quote me properly, so I don't want to be misquoted. If you send me email, I would be even more appreciate. If I'd be happy to get back to you. I check the contact. So yeah, I think you can quote me. That's no problem. But I don't want to be misquoted. Thank you so much.
We spent more time than we expected because there were so many questions. I think that reflects our keen interest in Chinese economy. And I would like to thank Dr. Huang again for his excellent presentation and for entertaining so many questions with a deep analysis. May I ask you to join me in giving him another big hand?